Britain's Paralympic team begins its quest for golden glory in Rio. More than 260 para-GB athletes will take part in 19 sports over 12 days. Despite hitches, Rio says it's ready. We'll be live with our correspondent in Rio, also this lunchtime. Theresa May tells the Commons Britain will not be rushed or pushed over Brexit. The questions over an NHS chief executive demoted to a new job created just for her, but on the same pay. The chairman of Sports Direct says he'll step down next year if he doesn't have the support of shareholders. From bust to dust, how a prominent feature of the Medway skyline for more than 30 years was demolished in seconds.
In the south, the head of Southern Health tells us about the decision to move the former chief executive into a new £250,000 job. And moving forward, plans for 3,500 homes near Basingstoke.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. In less than 10 hours' time, the 2016 Paralympics gets underway with the opening ceremony in Rio. More than 260 para-GB athletes will take part in 19 sports over 12 days. Britain's flag bearer tonight is the equestrian rider Lee Pearson, who's called it the biggest honour. There's been some controversy in the build-up to the Games, including poor ticket sales, the Russian team being banned following the country's doping scandal, and questions over the way athletes are classified. But organisers say they're confident that Rio is ready. Our correspondent Julia Carnero reports now from the host city.
Rio's stage is set once again. On Copacabana Beach, the Paralympic agitos have now replaced the Olympic rings. The Paralympic torch has been to 5 Brazilian cities and is now traveling across Rio in the final moments ahead of the opening ceremony of the Paralympic Games. 2 weeks ago, the Games seemed at serious risk due to major financial cutbacks. Only 12% of the tickets had been sold, leading to fears of a rerun of the many empty seats at the Olympics. Authorities have scrambled to plug the budget gaps, and sales have been boosted by lower prices and crowdfunding campaigns. Organizers say over half the tickets have now been sold.
As an athlete, you have to be able to compete in an empty room. You know, we quite frequently compete in an empty room at the World Championships with just our own travelling family, so we get quite used to that.
Concerns have also been raised about the system of classification and whether it truly matches athletes against those with similar degrees of impairment. But the boss of the British Paralympic Association said athletes would compete within both the letter and the spirit of the Paralympics. And he was optimistic all would come right in the end.
I know that it's been challenging, and I know it's challenging still for the organising committee. But the Paralympic Games is a wonderful thing, and I think that spirit will carry us through.
Facing adversity is at the core of the Paralympics. Now it's on Rio to overcome its own troubles and leave the sport free to shine. Julia Carneiro, BBC News, Rio de Janeiro.
So, Rio is ready for the Paralympics with the opening ceremony tonight. While the venues are familiar, many of the faces have changed, as Paralympian Kate Gray reports.
The unrivaled views of Rio de Janeiro remain unchanged. Across the city, many of the familiar venues from the Olympics will now be filled with Paralympic stars, all hoping to make their mark. Despite the troubles there's been in the lead-up to these Paralympics, it's still expected to be a record-breaking Games on the field of play, with 4,300 athletes from 161 countries set to compete across 23 sports, including 2 new sports, canoeing and triathlon, that will take place here at the iconic Copacabana Beach. And Great Britain's Lauren Steadman is one of the firm favourites for gold. Since switching from swimming to triathlon, she's dominated the sport.
It would kind of be like the icing on the cake. Like I've had all the other titles going, and I suppose if you look at my Paralympic career, Beijing I didn't make finals, London I made finals, so to get on the podium this time, and if I can bring home that gold, it would kind of just feel like it's a complete circle.
At the Aquatic Centre, Rio's poster boy and 10-time Paralympic champion Daniel Diaz will need all the support of his home crowd as he competes in 9 events. Already Brazil's most successful Paralympian, he could be reaching Michael Phelps' status. And in the velodrome, Dame Sarah Storey could become Britain's most successful female Paralympian on day one of competition when she races in her first of 4 events, chasing that illustrious 12th gold medal to beat Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson's record. It's less than 3 weeks since Team GB made history here in the Olympic Park, beating China on the medals table for the first time. But it won't be so easy for Paralympics GB, as China has been the leading and unbeaten nation in Paralympic sport since Athens 2004. And table tennis is their national sport, but Britain's Will Bailey isn't intimidated by the Chinese supremacy.
This is special. It's a great atmosphere, and do you know what? In this games, I feel like I'm here to do a job more than ever. Really, before in London, I sort of was enjoying the experience of being in London, your home games, but now I'm just here to do a job and to bring back what I want to bring back from Rio.
With 528 gold medals up for grabs, these games will be the biggest ever. The question is, will they be the greatest? Kate Gray, BBC News, Rio.
Let's go to our sports correspondent Andy Swiss, who's in Rio for us. Andy.
Yes, Simon, welcome to what is now the Paralympic Park here in Rio, and I'm delighted to be joined by the chef de mission for the British team, Penny Briscoe. Penny, many thanks for joining us. So here we are, the morning of the opening ceremony. Just give us a sense of the buzz among the British team right now.
Yeah, I guess it's a day we've been waiting for 4 years, and mood in the camp this morning was that probably of relaxed professionalism.
Yeah, your target here is to beat the 120 medals that you won at London 2012. How challenging do you think that will be?
Yeah, mission 121. It is a big challenge, but I think that what we need to, I guess, put into perspective is that we've got 19 sports, 264 athletes, all of whom are capable of contributing to that 121 medal target. So it will be very much a team-based approach to day by day ticking the medal tally over. And I think, you know, one of the things that excites me most about this team is the breadth of potential across those 19 sports.
Yeah, and just tell us a little bit about the team, because there's a mixture of familiar names from London 2012, but also a lot of new faces as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's what makes, you know, Paralympic sport so exciting, that we've got at one end of the spectrum, you know, Anne Dunham, at the other end we've got Abby Kane, who's literally just 13, and, you know, and everything in between. We've got new sports on the programme, so para-canoe and para-tri bring in new athletes. And it really is a mix of experience and those new athletes just chomping at the bit, wanting to get going on Thursday.
And it could all start tomorrow with a potentially historic day for Dame Sarah Storey, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, we're trying not to focus on individual athletes. We don't want to, you know, increase that pressure. And there's a lot of medal potential on each of the 11 days of competition. So, you know, there'll be a lot to watch.
Well, Penny Briscoe, many thanks indeed for joining us. So there we have it, after the success of Britain's Olympians here in Rio, Britain's Paralympians now hoping to follow suit, Simon.
Andy Swiss, thank you very much. And you can follow all the action from the Paralympics with commentary on BBC Radio 5 Live. The BBC Sport website will have comprehensive coverage throughout the Games, and you can sign up for medal alerts via the BBC Sport app. Theresa May has insisted she won't be giving a running commentary on negotiations to leave the European Union. She was responding when pressed by the SNP's Angus Robertson on whether she wanted the UK to remain fully part of the European single market. Well, let's speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, and of course this, her first Prime Minister's Questions.
And what we got, Simon, was basically a plea for patience from Theresa May, in effect saying to politicians and the public, look, cut me some slack over Brexit, give me some time to work out the details before I let you know what's going on. The difficulty is, all summer we have had Mrs May saying Brexit means Brexit, but no one really has a clue what that means. We don't know whether that means we stay in the single market. Today, Mrs May said, well, I'm not going to give a running commentary on that. We don't know what sort of immigration curbs might be put in place. We know it's not going to be a points-based system, but we don't know what it might be. We don't know whether we'll still be giving funds to the EU. Mrs May's argument today was, look, this is difficult. It's going to take time. You cannot expect me to show my negotiating hand before I'm good and ready. Have a listen to her.
This is about getting the kind of deal that is ambitious and bold for Britain. It's not about the Norway model or the Swiss model or any other country's model. It's about developing our own British model. So we will not take decisions until we are ready. We will not reveal our hand prematurely. And we will not provide a running commentary on every twist and turn of the negotiation.
Now, that may be fine and dandy for now, but the difficulty is over time, it begins to look weak, to look indecisive. It leaves you open to the charge that maybe you don't have a plan, maybe you don't actually know what Brexit will mean. And the danger for Mrs May is that there are already Tory Brexiteers who are impatient with the pace of leaving the EU and want Mrs May to get on with it, trigger Article 50 and get Britain out of the EU.
Norman Smith, thank you very much. Her removal as Chief Executive of Southern Health NHS Foundation Trust was widely welcomed, but her move to a less senior role while retaining her salary of £240,000 was not. Now the Trust chairman has defended the way Katrina Percy was treated, saying she was uniquely qualified to remain there. Our correspondent David Fenton reports.
It's fantastic, the changes.
Katrina Percy has faced months of criticism for the way her trust failed to investigate patient deaths.
These are people, you should be investigating every single death that's not expected. It's outrageous, you know, you can't do this to people. That's why they feel so isolated, and that's why your services aren't good, because you really don't care about them.
It's going to get worse.
Last week she resigned and went straight into a new job at the same trust and on the same salary, £240,000 a year, including pension benefits. Today her chairman gave details of the move in an exclusive interview with the BBC. Did the new job exist before Katrina took it?
The work needed to be done.
Did that new job exist before Katrina took it?
No.
Did you advertise that job so other people could apply?
No.
Was Katrina the only candidate?
She's uniquely qualified for it.
Was she the only candidate?
Yes.
To many people that will sound like a fix.
But that is not the case.
He said Katrina Percy was uniquely qualified to remain at the Trust. She'll now be giving strategic advice to GPs, a role that was needed. Relatives were outraged at the sideways move.
Somebody in her position of responsibility who's letting so many people down, and we've seen all of those deaths which went by uninvestigated, and she's still there. And she's taking a sideways step with her salary. I think it's outrageous, completely outrageous.
Southern Health say they've addressed the failings highlighted in a series of reports and that patients are now safe.
I can unequivocally look you in the eye and say that every member of staff that I have met who works on the front line is putting patient safety and the quality of care first.
They still face criticisms and are now being investigated by the Health and Safety Executive over the earlier deaths of patients. David Fenton, BBC News.
And you can see more on that story in Broken Trust on BBC One in the South at 7:30 tonight and across the UK at 8:30 on the BBC News channel. Shares in the controversial leisurewear company Sports Direct dropped 10% this morning as shareholders met for its annual meeting. The founder, Mike Ashley, has been attacked by MPs who criticised the company's Victorian workhouse practices. Shareholders want to depose the chairman, Keith Halliwell, but the board has stood firm despite his offer to resign over the weekend. Our business correspondent Theo Leggett reports.
The calm before the storm, shareholders arriving for Sports Direct's annual general meeting, eager to have their say over the way the business is being run. It's already been a dramatic week for the company. Yesterday it admitted that there had been serious shortcomings in the way workers were treated here at its main warehouse in Shirebrook. It promised big changes. But that's unlikely to reduce the pressure on this man, Chairman Keith Halliwell. Sports Direct says he offered his resignation at the weekend and it wasn't accepted. But unions and some powerful shareholders say they still want him out.
We've been calling for the chairman to resign. We think there's major governance issues at the company that simply haven't been addressed. Us and several other shareholders have been calling for governance reform for several years. That has not happened, and we want the chairman to step down.
It's no real surprise that investors are getting unhappy. Sports Direct has been mired in scandal for months, and its earnings have been pretty disappointing as well. Small wonder then that its share price has more than halved over the past 12 months. And with profits expected to head downwards as well, the future isn't looking too rosy either. But real power within Sports Direct lies with Mike Ashley, the founder and majority shareholder. So any changes to the board or company policy will need his approval. And some investors at least seem reasonably happy.
I think the criticism is overblown, and just hope the company gets through the present difficulties.
At today's meeting, Sports Direct's board admitted the company had reached a watershed moment. Investors will now be watching carefully to see whether it goes through with promises of reform. If not, shareholder discontent is likely to grow ever louder. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
Just after 1:15, our top story this lunchtime. Britain's Paralympic team begins its quest for glory in Brazil. Despite hitches, Rio says it's ready. Coming up, why does the controversial figure of Donald Trump strike a chord with the Russians?
In South Today, we'll have your very latest weather forecast for you. Plus, another 2 days of strikes and commuter chaos for Southern Rail passengers. And moving forward, plans for 3,500 new homes near Basingstoke.
There'll be fresh attempts to end the 5 years of Syrian civil war later this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, is hosting a meeting in London of opposition leaders and their main allies. Plans will be set out for the transition to a democratic state without President Bashar al-Assad. But the Syrian government has dismissed any idea that President Assad should stand down. Viewers may find some of the images in this report from Caroline Hawley distressing.
This is what the Syrian conflict has done to just one neighbourhood of Aleppo. 5 years of war have had a catastrophic impact on the country. More than half the population has had to flee their homes. Hundreds of thousands of people are dead. And still there's no solution even remotely in sight. Every day in Syria brings more destruction. This was the aftermath of an airstrike yesterday in the rebel-held east of Aleppo. The opposition say that the regime dropped chlorine gas in a barrel bomb. The UN now says it believes chlorine was indeed used in Aleppo earlier this year.
We've received reliable information concerning the use of chlorine gas in Sheikh Maqsood neighborhood of Aleppo city, particularly at the beginning of April on the 5th, with various people being taken to hospital for chlorine gas inhalation symptoms.
Today at the Foreign Office in London, Syria's main opposition negotiating group is meeting with foreign ministers of the countries that back them. The group has set out their most detailed plans yet for a transfer of power, a Syria without Bashar al-Assad.
The opposition has come up with concrete proposals. The regime has always said no, and they've never even put any ideas on the table. This time the opposition is going a step further and will be laying out a more detailed plan for a transition, what their vision is for Syria, what Syria should look like. It should include everybody, it should be a democracy.
But for all the talk of a new Syria, what matters is what happens on the ground, and the fighting is unrelenting. The international community can't even get agreement on a 2-day humanitarian ceasefire for one Syrian city. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Well, our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, is in Damascus. Even though these talks are looking at a Syria without President Assad, is there any cause for optimism at all?
No, I don't think there's any cause for optimism in Syria whatsoever. Of course, there are good individuals who you find who are trying to do their best to alleviate people's suffering. But the reality here is that there are lots of groups and countries, powerful outside countries involved, who I think still believe that there's a military solution here, and they're trying to slowly bring it about. And also, the President Assad's regime, I think, feels more secure than at any time really since the war started. That's because of the Russian intervention. Now, the document presented in London Had it been coming from the political leadership of a victorious army at the gates of the presidential palace, I think it could be seen as a very detailed, useful and enlightened piece of peacemaking. But it doesn't. It comes from a group of people who don't have a great deal of traction on the ground, and it's dependent on a regime deciding to, if you like, commit suicide, to step down when it's been fighting for its life for more than 5 years. So I don't think that's going to happen. The only thing that I think will shift President Assad would be military defeat, or his Russian allies, primarily the Russians, pulling the plug on his regime and saying, Bashar, it's time to go. That, of course, wouldn't necessarily usher in a democracy, and there is no sign anyway of it happening.
Jeremy Bowen in Damascus, thank you. A former taxi driver from Swindon, Christopher Halliwell, has gone on trial accused of the murder of a prostitute. He's begun cross-examining witnesses himself at Bristol Crown Court. Our correspondent John Kay is there for us. John.
Yes, Simon, the first evidence we heard in this case was actually a written statement from Karen Edwards, who described her daughter Becky, that she'd been a happy and successful student at school, but that when she was 15, Becky had drifted into drugs and then ultimately into prostitution. And Karen Edwards said that when she heard that human remains had been found in a field near Swindon in 2002, she immediately feared the worst. Those remains turned out to be the body of Becky Godden, and the man who's accused of murdering her, Christopher Halliwell, a former taxi driver, has taken the decision, as is his right, to represent himself during this trial, and he gets the chance therefore to stand in the dock and question witnesses in court. The first live witness in court was a former prostitute who were not allowed to identify, but he cross-examined her, and he stood there and said, look, please take a long look at me and tell me that the person you are talking about, the person who you claim was a client of Becky Godden's, is me. And this woman replied immediately, definitely yes. He then said to her, I have never spoken to you before in your life. To which this witness said, what, like you never took me to buy crack, I suppose. This woman then said that she was 100 million% certain that the man in the dock, Christopher Halliwell, is the man that she remembers as a client of Becky Godden's, but he said that was a fairy tale. He denies the murder of Becky Godden, and this trial continues. It's likely to last for about a month. Simon.
John Kay, thank you very much. The misery continues for thousands of passengers on Southern Railway services today, with 2 more days of disruption. Members of the RMT union have begun the 5th strike since April in their dispute about plans to change working practices. The company says it aims to run around 60% of its services. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
After 5 walkouts in 6 months, strikes are almost becoming routine for Southern customers.
This is one of the morning services that will eventually get people into London. They have to change trains. You can see it's not horrendously busy because strike days people tend to make other plans. The thing is, passengers on Southern were already experiencing the worst delays and cancellations in the country, regardless of the strikes.
I'm just fed up to the back teeth. It's week after week, it's the same thing all the time.
It's extremely tiring and inconvenient, and I have no idea what time I'll get home this evening.
Are you getting used to strikes then?
Yes, I mean, past couple of weeks I've been coming home 40 minutes later. The train's just constantly delayed. Not necessarily striking, but late all the time.
It's a row over who does this. The company wants more drivers rather than the onboard guards to shut the doors on its trains.
There's an absolutely safety critical role, and we can't allow the trains to be travelling without any guard on board.
We need to modernise our railway. We have to use trains differently, we have to have longer trains and new trains, and we need to improve the performance, and we know doing that through driver-only operation is a way to achieve that.
Even without the strikes, Southern's been running an emergency timetable because it didn't have the staff to run enough trains. They've been cancelling hundreds of services every day for months.
For some people, things got so bad, a 1-hour journey on these trains regularly turning into a 3-hour marathon, they were forced to make some major changes in their life.
Matt Steele gave up his London commute. Now he cycles to a more local job.
I distinctly remember sitting on a train one evening that was just crawling incredibly slowly. All the trains were backed up along the Brighton line, and I just sort of sat there and thought, this is not the life I want to live anymore. And I was enjoying my job in London, but it had got to the point where you just sort of say, whatever I get out of that job is being eclipsed by how bad the trains are.
But there's a bigger picture here. The government wants more driver-only trains to cut costs. The unions say that threatens jobs. Whatever happens on Southern sets the tone for all our rail lines in future. Richard Westcott, BBC News, Horsham in Sussex.
The war of words between the two US presidential candidates is hotting up. The latest row between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton over who Russia would like to win. Yesterday, Mr. Trump claimed the Russian leader looks at Mrs. Clinton and laughs. Hillary Clinton has accused Mr. Trump of having a bizarre attraction to dictators, including Putin. So who would Russia like to see in the White House next year? Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg reports.
Outside the US Embassy in Moscow, it's a modern version of War and Peace. Maria is not exactly Tolstoy. She's a pro-Putin activist. And, as you can see, she's pro-Trump too. And just to prove it, she's brought along her Donald Doves. As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton caused a new Cold War, Maria says. Trump as president brings hope of a new world order. And from the sound of things, Moscow stands to benefit.
Wouldn't it be nice if we actually did get along with Russia? Wouldn't it be nice?
And a President Trump may recognize Crimea as part of Russia.
I'm going to take a look at it. But, you know, the people of Crimea, from what I've heard, would rather be with Russia than where they were.
So is Trump Moscow's man? The Russians deny it.
Because we're not involved anyhow in this campaign. We're not supporting Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, or others, politicians or people in American policy in any sort of domestic elections.
And yet, if you take a look back over the last 100 years or so of Russian history, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Russian leader and a US presidential candidate who have more in common, a more similar view of the world, than Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And since Trump says nice things about Russia and its leader, while Hillary Clinton is more hardline on Moscow, it's not surprising that polls here show more Russians want him to win than her. No one sings Donald Trump's praises louder than Russia's most famous pop star.
Oh, Donald Trump. Oh my God.
Philippe Kirkorov has known Donald Trump for more than 20 years. He was one of the judges at Trump's Miss Universe contest in Moscow.
If Donald Trump will be president, the relationship between our country will be much, much better, closer, and I pray for that because I miss something very special between Russia and America. I miss it because two big nations, two big countries, they must be friends.
Donald Trump called him Russia's Michael Jackson, and he's hoping to call Trump America's president. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Now, just over 800 feet tall, that's taller than 55 double-decker buses stacked on top of each other. This chimney on the Isle of Grain in Kent has been a familiar feature on the skyline for nearly 40 years. That was until 11 o'clock this morning. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy can tell us what's happened to it. Duncan.
Well, I can tell you, Simon, that the dust is still settling on the site behind me after two massive explosions brought that iconic tower down. It was a successful day for the demolition team, but something of a sad one for the former workers who turned up to witness this.
10, 9, 8, 7.
There's never been a demolition quite like this. One ton of explosives, more than twice the height of Big Ben, blown up on the stroke of 11. Wow! There she goes. 244 metres, collapsing on itself. The tallest concrete structure ever to be demolished in Britain.
5,
before. The button was pressed by Steve Crooks here on the left. The power station's longest serving worker who clocked up 40 years. How did it go?
It went good, so I'm surprised at the rate of which it came down. It was pretty amazing.
And your feelings now?
But you feel a little bit sad. No, that's it, it's gone completely now. It's the end of that era.
Grain was an oil-fired power station that created electricity for 1 million homes. But it became too expensive and too polluting to continue. Yet its destruction today doesn't mean fossil fuels are all being phased out in Britain's power stations.
We believe that the government's aims to reduce carbon emissions are right, but we also believe that the fossil-fired generation still has a role to play in the generation mix.
There's life in them yet?
Oh, absolutely.
A beacon for aircraft and an icon for locals. 4 decades here at a place they call Britain's Power Peninsula, now reduced to industrial history. Quite a sight, and you're looking at what's left of the chimney there. Something like 40,000 tonnes of rubble generated by those explosions. They're all going to an infill site. This really is the end of this iconic structure. Simon.
Duncan, thank you very much. Time for the weather. Over to Phil Avery. Phil.
Simon, thanks very much. You may well have noticed two things when you stepped out the door first thing. There's quite a bit of cloud across the British Isles. The thing that you probably did notice, though, temperatures well on into the teens, if not 20 degrees or so. What on earth is going on? Well, we've tapped into some of the warmth that's quite widely available across the western side of Europe at the moment, 30 to 40 degrees quite widely. And drier air is on the way, and you may well have seen that already across perhaps the far southeast of England. We're lying on the western side of an area of high pressure. We've got this south to southeast flow up and across the British Isles, and as I say, we're importing slowly but surely drier air, which is helping to break up some of the cloud. And I think that'll be one of the themes of the afternoon across the southern counties of both England and Wales. And the temperatures, as a consequence, will respond rather like yesterday. Could see the tops of 27, possibly somebody getting 28. Now, it's not going to be like that everywhere. There will be breaks elsewhere. I think it's going to be a fairly slow process, perhaps around about the Wash, for example. You may well get there. And as we come further north, some of that heat getting up towards the Dundee area. Generally speaking, though, the further north and west you are in Scotland, the thicker the cloud, and I think it's going to keep producing some rain and drizzle for the Western Isles and maybe areas of the north of the Great Glen during the course of the afternoon. If you've got plans for the evening, a very decent evening, those clearer skies gradually percolating in from the south. And then notice later on, we're just joining those dots out here. That's a weather front which won't stop it being another close night, despite the fact that that set of dots is in fact a cold front. So somewhat cooler conditions trying to come in from the west, light and patchy rain across England and Wales. But certainly the north of England and parts of Scotland, heavy rain for a time during Thursday morning before that quits the scene, leaving behind for the greater part of England and Wales a pretty pleasant afternoon. As I say, temperatures a couple of degrees down, and it will feel that tad fresher. There'll be a dotting of showers across western Scotland and through Northern Ireland. Through the evening, I think we'll just ramp up the cloud across western parts. The breeze will freshen as well. That's the signs of a new weather front coming in from the Atlantic. And for Friday, that will have some really quite heavy bursts of rain in a cloud shield that will really dominate the scene across central and western parts of the British Isles. Lurking behind me, another set of fronts, and I'm giving you two snapshots. Saturday, that front is going to be, come the afternoon, all over eastern parts of England. And once you've got it, you'll be stuck with it. Come Sunday, it's gone. And then we're looking away towards the northwest for another set of spell of wind and cloud and rain. So the weekend, not a write-off by any means. Simon.
Thanks, Phil. That's it now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Good afternoon.